And welcome back to the most recent episode of LA Fishguys. Sorry, it's been a number of months that I've been away, but as you've seen, a lot of the old videos got reposted. There's a reason behind that, and that has to do with the music, more specifically music copyright issues. I have an aquarium service customer who has lent me the music in the past. Let's just say 3 different groups of that music. The first group, which a lot of you have probably never heard and never seen, were the original 35 episodes. He gave me replacement music for that, but I never wanted to go backwards. I wanted to move forward. So the first 35 episodes have never really been reproduced other than the best of the original 35 episodes, which you can find on the LA Fish Guy website. The second group of music, as well as the third, kind of got pulled out from underneath me in 2 different phases. The first phase, we'll just refer to it as the GSL music, I replaced, but unfortunately, after I replaced all of that, I found that the third group of music had then been pulled out from underneath me. So for all intents and purpose, everything except for maybe the last 40 shows, if I haven't replaced the music, has unfortunately been removed from YouTube or wherever. You might find some of those old episodes on the LA Fish Guy website, but for all intent and purpose, I've had to remove all of the old music. The new music, which is with a website called Smart Sound, gave me the ability to select which choices I wanted, but the really neat thing, it also gave me variations on the same musical tune, as well as the ability to select the length of that track. So as we move forward, you'll find that the music may have a little bit different feel. For whatever reason, I seem to be in kind of a hard rock phase, so hopefully that doesn't scare a lot of you away. But from this point moving forward, it should be brand new episodes. I'd also like to mention that there will be a new spin-off of LA Fish Guys coming up, referred to as Aquarium Tech Talk, a little variation on LA Fish Guys, and it'll be hosted by not only myself in an off-camera manner, but by Scott Leaf, the guy with the 500-gallon aquarium, who will be on camera and kind of showing you a little bit about aquarium automation. Having said all that, I have a short episode to give you today, which involves my holding system here at home. This being the system at home, I refer to it as my holding system or my quarantine system. I have had these tanks since, probably 1995. I was able to buy them from a fish wholesaler who was going out of business. They're all acrylic. The tanks were probably 20 years old when I bought them, and I've had them now for about 20 years myself. I was able to pick them up for $10 a piece, which was the acrylic tank, the fittings in the back, such as the screened outlet, and then there's also an adjustable return line there. And they've got different colored backs, but you can see they're got a lot of crazy and a lot of scratches and such in on them. But they're in my home or in my garage, or should I say the LA Fish Guy fish room, and so I'm pretty much the only one who ever sees them, and so I can allow them to get dirty with algae or something. The reality is, as I said, this is where I hold all the fish that I sell to my customers, and I usually have some low level of medication in here, maybe a low salinity situation, and it again allows me to not only pre-treat a lot of the fish that I buy, but really the main effort or thrust of this system is to get the fish, which have within the last week or so been collected from the wild, brought into captivity, and it allows them to kind of socially and psychologically get used to a captive environment, and at the same time get used to captive foods such as frozen mysis or algae paper or green foods of various sorts, etc., etc., etc. Actually, it kind of comes down to the kind of foods that I'm selling is what I'm going to get the fish adjusted to. Not only is that the most profitable for me, keep in mind, I'm in a business, and the business has to make a profit, and it also happens to be what I have in my freezer, and what those fish will be being fed once they get sold to the customers. This system essentially is comprised of 3 different rows of tanks, and each row is driven by its own separate submersible water pump, and yet all 3 rows filter into a wet-dry trickle filter at the far end. So for all intent and purpose, it's a central filter system. There are advantages and disadvantages of that. In a centrally fed system, one tank is exposed to everything that occurs in all the other tanks. In an individual system, each system has to rely on its own filter system as well as its own aeration. Here, my central filter system, all the aeration occurs in the wet-dry trickle filter at the far end. All the biological filtration occurs in that same system. The filter system, or the biological filter, actually is an old 90-gallon aquarium that I took and was able to use some egg crate grid to create a division within the tank, and the far side is filled with bio balls, and then the open side is where all the little submersible water pumps as well as the heaters are located. And boy, I tell you, if that isn't a potential electrical hazard, I don't know what is. And again, I've had to deal with a handful of situations that have occurred in there in the past. It's also an old air pump operated with wood and airstone protein skimmer. I'm not really striving for ultra pure water here, partly because the fish that are coming in tend to bring little issues with them, but mostly because there's an abundance of food, there's also an abundance of medication that passes through the system, and as a result, there's a lot of big water changes that occur as well. So as I mentioned, there were 3 different rows. Each row is driven by a different submersible water pump that pumps from inside the reservoir up through the PVC and into some of these lines back here, which runs down the back side of all of these tanks, and there's a little nozzle in there, an adjustable nozzle that each tank gets X amount of water, and you try to balance out all 3 rows so that it's kind of equal inside there. All 3 rows also have a little bulkhead in the back with a strainer in it, and all of that water is collected in a central manifold that in turn runs down and then comes into the top of the trickle filter, and then the water rains down through those bioballs. So there's a goodly amount of bioballs in there, and what it provides is not only a very effective source of biological filtration, but also provides a significant amount of aeration to the water itself. That water then pools over at one end of the filter where those 3 pumps pump it out into the various tanks. As I've mentioned, I've had these tanks for a number of years, and the last 13 years they've been here at this location, and at one time were set up in 3 separate little rows that stood out for a total of something like 30-some different 15-gallon tanks. But as the jellyfish project encroached into the room, I had to kind of reduce that. I think I'm down to 22 or 23 tanks now. There's 9 15 gallons over there, there's 6 15 gallons here, and this 125 below. Works out to about 330 gallons. It's been very effective in the past from a biological standpoint. It's been very effective in the past from a medicinal or a proactive medication type system. I have no real issues with it. Recently, I had a service customer with a reef tank that there was something that went wrong with the equipment, thus forcing the heater to either stop working entirely, or I think it was to drive the temperature way up into the 90s. It stressed out the fish, and in turn, they broke out in it. Now, as you're probably aware, that a reef tank is really a difficult place to try to medicate anything, mostly because the reef tank's full of corals and various invertebrates, and the medication you would put in there would have a devastating effect on those. So you end up having to use certain medications that unfortunately are just not that effective. And this customer went through about a month's worth of medication with a reef-safe medication, but the problem just only continued to escalate in the tank. We got to a point where I, as the service person overseeing a service account, decided that it was no longer going to be effective to try to continue to solve the problem in the customer's reef tank, and that the answer was to remove the fish and bring them home and put them in my system where I could more effectively medicate them. The first challenge, though, was catching the fish in a reef tank. And that is not an easy thing to do. And the answer, the simple answer, is you gotta be smarter than the fish. And if you think in terms of that, it gives you at least an idea as to how to try to address the problem. And so how would you go about catching the fish in a reef tank and being smarter than the fish? Well, the answer is to eliminate the water. The fish can't swim away from you in that situation, or it's much easier to catch them because there's a lot less water for them to swim in. And so what we ended up doing was, with the customer's 5-gallon jugs and a large container that I use for the 40-gallon water change, we basically drained all the water out of that reef tank, so there might have been about this much left in the tank. And from there, we were able to reach in easily with a net and capture the fish. Once I had all the fish in buckets and such, I could bring them home, and of course the water we had taken out of the tank, we essentially just poured back into the tank.
Have you heard of this new aquarium superfood? It's true. Larry's Reef Services blends a premium human-grade frozen food called LRS Reef Frenzy, and it's good enough to eat.
LRS Reef Frenzy for reef tanks.
LRS is the first food that contains lab-verified probiotics.
And LRS makes Fish Frenzy for small fish and nano reef tanks.
LRS is supplemented with fatty acids and vitamin C.
LRS also offers Herbivore Frenzy for tangs and other plant-eating fish.
LRS is made with fresh Carolina seafood.
And LRS makes a Fish Frenzy in a chunky version for big fish.
LRS is crafted by hand, by hobbyists, for hobbyists, and made in the USA.
LRS Frozen Foods. Good enough for the fish, good enough for me.
For more information, visit reeffrenzy.com.
Hi there, my name's Jim Stime, and you know me as the LA Fish Guy. Well, I also wear a couple of other hats. One of them is the jellyfish tank called the Jelly Aquarium, and the third is myfishtank.com. I offer an entire line of acrylic aquariums ranging from rectangular to hexagon, flatback hex, as well as the custom curve front aquariums. There's also an entire line of stands and canopies ranging from MDF to pine to oak with a variety of different finishes available. And the website is even smart enough that you can calculate what the freight and crate charges to your location will be. That's myfishtank.com.
Reef Hobbyist magazine believes that our hobby, our fellow hobbyists, and the animals in our care are best served by the free distribution of quality information. Reef Hobbyist magazine provides hobbyists with critical husbandry information with an emphasis on marine ornamental breeding efforts. Reef Hobbyist magazine is available for free in local fish stores across the country, or you can subscribe at www.reefhobbyistmagazine.com.
So having removed the fish out of the customer's reef tank, it then allowed that tank to essentially starve the parasites in that tank of their food source, which in this case would be the fish. And so we essentially intended to bring those fish home here for 30 to 60 days before I return them back to the customer. And again, the idea being that we would starve the parasites in that tank of their host, so that essentially the parasites would go through their life cycle and die out. And at the same time, I could bring those fish home here and more effectively medicate them. Unfortunately, what they brought along with them was a pretty severe case of something. I've not exactly figured out what it was, but for all intent and purpose, it wiped out my system. And at that time, I probably had 50 different fish here, and I brought home, I think, 7, 8, or 9 of the customers' fish. And they were home here for maybe 4 or 5 days before I began to notice first the royal grammas began to drop off, followed by the various fairy wrasses. I had a large French angel, I had a pair of facula butterfly fish, a number of other smaller clownfish, yellow tangs, there were some blue tangs. There was a number of fish that I ended up losing, as well as all but 3 of the customers' fish. And sadly, I was never able to determine exactly what it was, because I never ever did see any little white spots on the fish. What I did see on some of them was red hemorrhages. What I saw on a lot of them was just heavy breathing, where in fact something was probably affecting the gills and inhibiting their ability to get oxygen. It was really kind of a frustrating and a very sad situation, as well as an embarrassing situation, to have lost the customer's fish. So now comes the question of responsibility or liability. I mean, again, I lost about 50 fish. Could have been $1,000 worth of potential sales that I could have made. The customer had 7, 8, or 9 fish that I brought here, and all of those were lost as well. The reality is that as a good service person, I was attempting to help my customers. And that's really what it's all about. That's why I'm in business. That's why they call me. And so I can't not offer that service again in the future, although I'll be a little more hesitant next time. But at the same time, there was a loss. Customer lost and I lost. What can I do about that? Really nothing. I ended up giving back the 3 remaining fish to the customer. I think I charged them $15 a fish over 2 months to basically compensate me for food, as well as the water, electricity, time, etc. Certainly was not a profit venture. The fish that I lost, you just got to kind of mark that up to experience. I can't see charging the customer. I mean, that was a lot of money. They wouldn't appreciate it. And it's no real liability or responsibility on their part. It was a chance that I took. My feelings were to try to help the customer, which again is what I'm in business to do. So having gotten past the death part of it, the question now is, what are we going to do as far as what's in the system? And the answer comes down to, you gotta kind of sterilize the system. So how do you go about sterilizing a fish system? Well, the first thought is, because I'm not a retail store, I'm an aquarium maintenance business, and other than the potential loss of sales, I don't have an immediate need to fill my system back up with fish. So I can take a little bit longer approach to resolving the situation. And the first thing you might think of doing to sterilizing it would be basically just to pour a bottle of bleach straight into the system. And that would work. But I did have some fish that did live, 3 of them, plus I had the 3 customers' remaining fish. So I had to kind of move the fish into all the same rows, knowing that the top row is run by 1 pump, the middle row is run by another pump, and the bottom by a 3rd pump. So I moved all the fish into the middle row, which then allowed me to turn off the top row, drain the water, drain that gravel, and fill that top row with fresh water. I allowed the fresh water to sit in there for a while. I then went through and drained all that water, and then once again came back with some more fresh water and cleaned the inside of it. I also took and siphoned out all the gravel that was in those top tanks and allowed that to sit in fresh water for a number of days. So what I'm bringing back into the system, water-wise as well as gravel-wise, is clean and free of parasites. The trick was how to manage the 3 different levels. And basically, you just do 1 level at a time. And that's essentially what we've done over the course of the last month. It just happens to be tonight that I'm now refilling the system with new salt water. And I've essentially just pumped in about 200 gallons of new salt water, knowing that one of my rows was previously running. So essentially I've done a big 2/3 water change in those remaining tanks that were running 2 weeks ago, I did go buy a handful of damsel fish, and there's a damsel in each one of the top rows. And so far, other than their partner that they beat up, there's one remaining damsel per tank still alive. It's not that I was trying to recycle the system. I was just trying to make sure that A, there was no bugs still in the system that was going to wipe out fish, and B, those damsels can kind of help seed the new system. With that said, I'm fairly comfortable now that I've refilled the whole system with new salt water. It didn't have to go through a new cycle, so other than a slight decrease in biological ability, that coming from the gravel and such that previously was in there, now it's new clean gravel that doesn't have the bacteria in there. So at this point, the entire biological filtration is actually now occurring out of that wet-dry trickle filter. But tomorrow is my fun day, my fish wholesaler and tank manufacturer day, and I will be going down and I'll be looking for not really expensive fish, but I do want to have some fish back in the system. I've got a couple of customers that would like to add some more fish to their system. I've got some customers I'd like to sell more fish in their system. And the bottom line is if you ain't got fish to sell, you're not going to make any sales. So it behooves me as a service person to have some fish on hand. And so again, that's what my intent tomorrow is, to go down and buy a number of fish. I'll probably share a little bit of that with you. But then again, maybe not. So, having said all that, welcome back to LA Fishguys. This will be a new music version of the show. There's a good half dozen episodes already filmed, as well as at least 3 or 4 of that new Aquarium Tech Talk series with Scott. So, sorry to have been away for so long, and even though you had to endure a lot of repeat shows, there's also a lot of you out there that had never seen those shows before, so it gave those viewers a chance to see some of the stuff. It also gave the advertisers a chance to get their word back out there again. So with all of that said, again, sorry for the delay, welcome back, and I'll see you here in the near future with new episodes of LA Fishguys. And keep moving forward.